The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the community recreation center as Tommy Martinez wiped blood from his split lip, his GI torn at the shoulder from the brutal takedown that had ended his match. It was October 1972, and the smell of sweat and determination filled the cramped gymnasium where the annual Western States Karate Championship was being held. The 15-year-old sat on the wooden bench, shoulders slumped in defeat as his opponent celebrated with his teammates across the mat. Tommy had trained for months under Sensei Williams at the local dojo, practicing his kata forms and sparring techniques religiously, but it hadn't been enough. The harsh reality of tournament karate in America was that only the strongest survived, and today he had come up short. His father, Miguel Martinez, stood near the registration table with crossed arms, his construction worker's hands clenched into fists. The disappointment on his weathered face was unmistakable as he watched other parents congratulate their victorious children. Miguel had saved for weeks to pay the $20 entry fee, money that could have gone toward groceries for their family of 5. "Get up, you pathetic excuse for a fighter," Miguel hissed as he approached his son, his voice carrying the weight of frustrated dreams. "I didn't spend my hard-earned money for you to embarrass our family name like this." The words cut deeper than any physical blow Tommy had received during his match. Tommy's younger sister, Maria, watched from the bleachers with tears in her eyes as their father's anger began to escalate. She had seen this pattern before at home, the way Miguel's disappointment could transform into something much darker and more dangerous. The gymnasium fell silent as Miguel grabbed Tommy by the collar of his gi, pulling him to his feet with unnecessary force. Other competitors and their families began to stare, some whispering among themselves about the harsh treatment they were witnessing. "Please, Papa," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the tournament. "I tried my best. Sensei Williams said I showed good technique, but my opponent was just stronger." His words seemed to only fuel his father's rage. Miguel raised his hand, prepared to strike his son in front of the entire tournament crowd, when a firm grip suddenly caught his wrist mid-air. The grip belonged to a man in his early 30s with calloused hands and a black belt tied around his waist, his GI bearing the insignia of the American Karate Association. "That's enough," the man said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that commanded immediate attention. His name was James Richardson, a third-degree black belt who had been watching the matches as a guest instructor, and his presence suddenly shifted the entire atmosphere of the confrontation. Miguel tried to pull his wrist free, but Richardson's grip was like iron, steady and unyielding. "This is none of your business, stranger. This is between me and my son," Miguel growled, his face reddening with both anger and embarrassment at being challenged publicly. Richardson looked directly into Tommy's eyes, seeing something that reminded him of his own childhood struggles with an abusive stepfather. The boy's spirit wasn't broken, just bruised, and there was still fire burning behind those tear-filled eyes. "You're coming with me," Richardson said to Tommy, his words spoken with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. The statement hung in the air like a challenge, drawing the attention of everyone within earshot. The tournament continued around them, but in that small corner of the gymnasium, a moment was unfolding that would change the course of a young man's life forever. The sound of GI fabric rustling and sneakers squeaking on the polished floor provided a backdrop to what felt like the beginning of something significant. Tommy looked up at the stranger who had just intervened, uncertain whether this was salvation or simply another form of trouble. All he knew was that the man's grip on his father's wrist hadn't wavered, and for the first time in months, someone had stood up for him. The community recreation center's parking lot was nearly empty as James Richardson led Tommy Martinez away from the tournament chaos inside. The October evening air carried the crisp promise of winter, and the fluorescent lights from the building cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt. Tommy's father had stormed off after Richardson's intervention, shouting threats and promises that this wasn't over. Maria had followed their father reluctantly, casting worried glances back at her brother as they disappeared into the maze of parked cars. The weight of family loyalty and fear had pulled her away, leaving Tommy alone with a stranger who had just upended his world. Richardson's 1969 Chevelle sat under a streetlight, its navy blue paint dulled by years of hard use. The car bore the practical marks of a working man's vehicle, with a few dings and scratches that spoke of real life rather than showroom perfection. Tommy hesitated at the passenger door, uncertainty written across his bruised features. "Where are we going?" Tommy asked, his voice still shaky from the confrontation with his father. The adrenaline from the tournament and the subsequent confrontation was beginning to wear off, leaving him feeling drained and vulnerable. Richardson opened his own door and paused, studying the young man across the car's roof. "My dojo. There's something I want to show you about what karate really means." His voice carried the same quiet authority that had stopped Miguel Martinez's hand, but now it held a gentler undertone. The drive through the suburban streets of Phoenix took them past strip malls and tract housing developments that had sprung up in the post-war boom. Richardson's dojo was located in a converted warehouse in an industrial district, far from the polished recreation centers where most tournaments were held. The sign outside read, "Richardson's American Karate Academy," and through the large windows, Tommy could see heavy bags hanging from the ceiling and training equipment arranged in orderly rows. The building had the worn, lived-in quality of a place where serious work was done. Inside, the smell of leather and sweat told the story of countless training sessions. The wooden floors were scarred from years of kata practice and sparring matches, and the walls were lined with certificates, photographs, and tournament trophies that spoke of achievement earned through discipline and dedication. Richardson flipped on the overhead lights, illuminating a space that felt more like a temple than a gymnasium. Unlike the chaotic atmosphere of the tournament, this place radiated a sense of calm purpose and respect for the martial arts. "Sit down," Richardson said, gesturing to a bench along one wall. Tommy complied, still uncertain about what was happening, but grateful to be away from his father's anger. The silence stretched between them as Richardson seemed to consider his words carefully. "I've been teaching karate for 8 years, Richardson began, settling onto the bench beside Tommy. "I opened this place in 1967, right after I got out of the army. I learned karate from Master Trias himself when the United States Karate Association was still finding its footing in this country." Tommy had heard of Robert Trias, the legendary figure who had brought karate to the American mainland and founded the first organized karate association in the United States. The connection to such martial arts royalty made Richardson's intervention at the tournament seem even more significant. "What I saw today reminded me of my own father," Richardson continued, his voice taking on a more personal tone. "He never understood what I was trying to accomplish with martial arts training. To him, fighting was about dominance and fear, not about discipline and self-improvement." Richardson stood and walked to a display case filled with medals and certificates from various tournaments and ranking examinations. "The American Karate Association taught me that martial arts aren't about beating other people down. They're about building yourself up, developing character, and learning to protect those who can't protect themselves." Tommy watched as his rescuer pulled a framed photograph from the wall, showing a group of serious-looking men in traditional karate uniforms. Richardson pointed to a younger version of himself standing beside the legendary Robert Trias at what appeared to be a formal ceremony. "Master, Trias used to say that the real enemy isn't the opponent in front of you, it's the weakness within yourself," Richardson explained, his finger tracing the edge of the photograph. "Today, I saw a young man who faced his opponent with courage, even knowing he might lose. That takes more strength than most people realize." The words hit Tommy like a physical blow, but instead of pain, they brought a strange sense of validation. No one had ever spoken to him about courage in the context of his tournament loss. His father had only seen failure and embarrassment. Richardson replaced the photograph and turned back to Tommy with a serious expression. "I'm going to make you an offer, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. I'll train you, but not the way most schools do it. Real karate training is about more than tournament victories. It's about becoming the kind of person who stands up for others, even when it's difficult." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Tommy considered the proposition being offered to him. Outside, the sounds of Phoenix traffic provided a distant soundtrack to what felt like a life-changing moment. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Richardson's American Karate Academy as Tommy Martinez swept the wooden floors in preparation for his first real training session. It had been 3 days since the tournament incident, and his father's anger had only grown more intense with each passing hour. The bruises on Tommy's ribs served as constant reminders of Miguel's disappointment. Richardson arrived at precisely 6 o'clock, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing civilian clothes that made him look more like a factory worker than a martial arts instructor. His approach to training was methodical and disciplined, reflecting the military background that had first brought him to the martial arts during his service years. "Before we begin with any physical training," Richardson said, settling onto the bench where they had talked 3 nights earlier, "I want you to understand what you're committing to. The United States Karate Association isn't just about learning how to fight. Master Trias built this organization on principles that go deeper than tournament victories." Tommy had spent the intervening days researching everything he could find about Robert Trias and the USKA at the public library. The legendary figure had founded the first karate school on the American mainland in Phoenix, Arizona in 1946, making him a local hero of sorts. His story of learning martial arts from a Chinese master during World War II had captured Tommy's imagination. Richardson pulled out a well-worn copy of The Hand is My Sword, Trias's groundbreaking textbook that had introduced American practitioners to the deeper philosophies of karate training. The book's pages were marked with notes and observations, evidence of countless readings and careful study. Master Trias wrote that karate knowledge should only be given to those whose moral character can be thoroughly trusted. Richardson read from a marked passage. "That means I need to know who you are beyond what happened at that tournament. Tell me about your family, your school, your dreams." Tommy found himself opening up about his life in ways he had never done before. He described his father's work at the construction sites around Phoenix, the financial struggles that made every dollar count, and his mother's quiet suffering as she tried to keep the family together, despite Miguel's increasing volatility. The Martinez family had moved to Phoenix from Tucson in 1969, following construction work as the city expanded rapidly in the post-war economic boom. Miguel had hoped that better job opportunities would improve their situation, but the pressures of supporting a family had only intensified his frustration with life. Richardson listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions that showed he was paying careful attention to the details of Tommy's story. His own background had taught him to recognize the signs of a young person struggling with circumstances beyond his control. "The first rule of karate training in this dojo," Richardson said when Tommy finished talking, "is that you leave your family problems at the door when you enter, and you take your training strength home with you when you leave. This place is neutral ground where you learn to be stronger than your circumstances." The philosophy aligned with everything Tommy had read about Robert Trias's approach to martial arts education. The USKA founder had believed that karate should build character first and fighting ability second, creating practitioners who could handle life's challenges with dignity and strength. Richardson stood and walked to a cabinet filled with training gear, pulling out a white belt and a beginner's manual that outlined the fundamental principles of Shuri-Ryu karate. The style that Trias had developed combined elements of Chinese kung fu with traditional Okinawan techniques, creating a uniquely American approach to martial arts. "We'll start with basics," Richardson explained, demonstrating the first kata form that every USKA student learned. His movements were precise and controlled, each technique flowing naturally into the next, with a grace that spoke of years of dedicated practice. Tommy followed along as best he could, his tournament experience giving him some familiarity with basic stances and blocks. However, Richardson's approach was different from his previous training, emphasizing mental focus and spiritual development alongside physical technique. The session lasted 2 hours, covering fundamental stances, basic strikes, and the philosophical foundations that would guide Tommy's development as a martial artist. Richardson's teaching style was patient but demanding, expecting complete attention and effort from his student. As they finished the morning's training, Richardson handed Tommy a card with the dojo's schedule and requirements. "Training is Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evenings, plus Saturday mornings. Miss more than 2 sessions in a month without a valid excuse, and you're out. This isn't a hobby. It's a commitment to becoming a better person." Tommy accepted the card with the solemnity of someone receiving a sacred trust. For the first time since the tournament disaster, he felt like he had found something worth dedicating himself to completely. The bruises from his father's anger were still tender, but Richardson's training offered the promise of inner strength that no amount of physical abuse could touch. The sound of traffic outside reminded both instructor and student that the real world was waiting beyond the dojo walls. However, within this converted warehouse, the foundations of something transformative were beginning to take shape. 2 months into his training at Richardson's American Karate Academy, Tommy Martinez had developed calluses on his knuckles from practicing makiwara board strikes and a new confidence that showed in his posture. The winter of 1972 had settled over Phoenix with its mild temperatures and clear skies, providing perfect weather for the outdoor conditioning exercises that Richardson incorporated into their training regimen. The dojo had become Tommy's refuge from the increasing tension at home. Miguel's drinking had worsened since the tournament incident, and his resentment toward his son's martial arts training had grown into something approaching obsession. The fact that Tommy was thriving under Richardson's guidance seemed to infuriate his father even more. Richardson had begun sharing more stories about the legendary Robert Trias during their training sessions, painting a picture of a man who had revolutionized martial arts in America through sheer determination and vision. The fact that Trias had opened his first dojo right here in Phoenix gave Tommy a sense of connection to something larger than his personal struggles. Master Trias faced opposition from every direction when he started teaching karate in 1946. Richardson explained as he demonstrated a complex kata sequence. The established boxing gyms didn't understand what he was doing. The military establishment questioned whether martial arts training had any real value. Even other martial artists from different backgrounds challenged his methods. Tommy tried to mirror Richardson's movements, focusing on the smooth transitions between defensive blocks and offensive strikes that characterized Shuri-ryu karate. The style that Trias had developed combined the practical combat techniques he had learned from the Chinese master Tongji Heichang with the philosophical foundations of traditional Okinawan martial arts. The training sessions had evolved beyond basic technique, instruction to include discussions about the moral responsibilities that came with martial arts knowledge. Richardson frequently quoted from "The hand is my sword," emphasizing Trias's belief that karate knowledge should only be given to those whose moral character could be thoroughly trusted. The USKA grew to over 500,000 members worldwide because Master Trias understood something that most martial arts instructors missed, Richardson continued, pausing to correct Tommy's stance. He knew that Americans needed martial arts training that addressed the unique challenges of modern life, not just ancient combat techniques. The United States Karate Association had indeed become the largest martial arts organization in the country by the late 1960s, with affiliated schools in every major city and a tournament circuit that had established the standards for competitive karate that were still being used. Richardson walked to his desk and pulled out a program from the 1963 World Karate Tournament in Chicago, the first international martial arts competition held on American soil. The yellowed pages contained photographs of competitors from across the globe, all gathered to test their skills according to the rules that Trias had written. "This tournament changed everything," Richardson said, pointing to a photograph of a younger Robert Trias presenting awards to the winners. Before this event, karate was still considered an exotic curiosity. Afterward, it became a legitimate sport and a serious form of physical and mental discipline. Tommy studied the photographs with fascination, noting how different the martial arts world had been just 9 years earlier. The competitors looked formal and serious, their uniforms crisp, and their expressions focused on the honor of representing their schools and styles. As their training session continued, Richardson began teaching Tommy more advanced techniques from the Shuri-ryu curriculum, including the flowing hand movements that reflected the Chinese kung fu influences in Trias's system. The complexity of the movements required complete concentration, leaving no mental space for worrying about family problems or tournament defeats. The afternoon sun streaming through the dojo windows created geometric patterns on the wooden floors as instructor and student worked through a series of two-person drills designed to develop timing and distance judgment. Richardson's teaching emphasized practical application over flashy techniques, reflecting the military background that both he and Master Trias had shared. Master Trias served as an Arizona Highway Patrol officer for 15 years. After the war, Richardson explained during a water break, he used his martial arts training on duty and taught self-defense techniques to his fellow officers. That practical experience shaped his approach to karate instruction. The connection between martial arts training and real-world application resonated strongly with Tommy, who was beginning to understand that karate offered more than just tournament victories or physical conditioning. The mental discipline and confidence he was developing were changing how he handled confrontations at school and at home. As they finished the session with meditation and breathing exercises, Richardson made an announcement that would change the trajectory of Tommy's training. Next month, the United States Karate Alliance is hosting a regional tournament in Los Angeles. I think you're ready to compete again, but this time, you'll be representing something bigger than just yourself. The prospect of returning to tournament competition brought back memories of his humiliating defeat and his father's violent reaction. But Tommy found himself nodding agreement. Under Richardson's guidance, he had discovered strength that went far beyond physical technique. The Los Angeles sports arena buzzed with the energy of over 2,000 competitors and spectators as the 1973 United States Karate Alliance Regional Championship got underway. Tommy Martinez sat in the bleachers beside Richardson, watching the black belt divisions compete, while trying to calm the nervous energy that had been building for weeks. This tournament was different from the local competition where his humiliation had begun 5 months earlier. The USKA had established rules and standards that elevated martial arts competition beyond simple brawling, creating an atmosphere of respect and discipline that honored the traditions Robert Trias had brought from the Pacific theater of World War II. Richardson had driven them to Los Angeles in his Chevelle, using the 3-hour journey to discuss strategy and mental preparation. Unlike Tommy's previous tournament experience, this trip felt like a pilgrimage to something sacred rather than just another sporting event. Master Trias used to say that competition reveals character more than it creates it. Richardson explained as they watched a particularly skilled competitor execute a flawless kata routine. Today isn't about winning or losing. It's about showing yourself and everyone watching what 5 months of proper training can accomplish. The tournament program listed over 300 competitors from USKA-affiliated schools across the Western United States, representing the kind of organized martial arts community that Trias had envisioned when he founded the association in 1948. The standardized rules and belt ranking system had created a common language that allowed practitioners from different schools to compete fairly. Tommy's division was scheduled for the afternoon, giving him time to observe the techniques and strategies being employed by more experienced competitors. The level of skill on display was significantly higher than what he had encountered at the local tournament, but Richardson's training had prepared him for this elevated competition. As they moved closer to the competition area, Tommy noticed his father standing near the entrance doors, wearing the same work clothes he had worn to the October tournament. Miguel's presence felt like a dark cloud threatening to overshadow the positive energy Tommy had cultivated through months of dedicated training. "He followed us here," Tommy said quietly, gesturing toward his father with a slight nod. The sight of Miguel brought back all the fear and anxiety that had characterized their relationship, threatening to undermine the confidence Richardson had helped him build. Richardson followed Tommy's gaze and studied Miguel Martinez with the calm assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating potential threats. "Your father is dealing with his own failures by trying to destroy your success. Don't let his weakness become your weakness." The wisdom echoed the teachings of Robert Trias, who had written extensively about the mental aspects of martial arts. Training in the hand is my sword, the legendary founder had understood that external pressures could only affect a martial artist who allowed them to penetrate his mental defenses. As Tommy's division was called to the staging area, Richardson placed a hand on his student's shoulder. "Remember everything we've practiced, but more importantly, remember who you've become. The boy who got beaten 5 months ago doesn't exist anymore." The competitors in Tommy's age and rank division represented a cross-section of the American martial arts community that Trias had helped create. There were suburban kids whose parents had enrolled them for discipline and exercise, military dependents who had been exposed to martial arts through their families' overseas assignments, and young men like Tommy who had found karate as a path away from difficult circumstances. Tommy's first match was against a red-haired boy from San Diego, whose technique was sharp but mechanical, lacking the fluid integration of mental and physical elements that Richardson had emphasized in their training. The USKA rules favored controlled technique over aggressive power, rewarding precision and form over brute force. The match began with the formal bow that Robert Trias had incorporated into American tournament competition, a gesture of respect that honored both the opponent and the martial arts traditions they were representing. Tommy felt his training take over as muscle. Memory and mental discipline merged into focused action. His opponent launched an immediate attack with a series of rapid punches that would have overwhelmed the untrained Tommy from 5 months earlier. However, Richardson's instruction in timing and distance allowed Tommy to evade the assault while positioning himself for effective counterattacks. The crowd noise faded as Tommy entered the mental state that Richardson had taught him to cultivate during training, a condition of relaxed alertness that allowed complete focus on the immediate situation while maintaining awareness of the broader tactical picture. His first scoring technique was a perfectly timed reverse punch that stopped just inches from his opponent's solar plexus, demonstrating the control that distinguished karate competition from street fighting. The judges raised their flags to award Tommy the point, marking his first tournament victory under Richardson's guidance. From the bleachers, Miguel watched his son's success with an expression that mixed surprise with something approaching pride, though his stubborn anger prevented him from fully embracing the moment. The match continued with Tommy displaying techniques and strategies that reflected months of dedicated training under Richardson's patient instruction, showing that proper martial arts education could transform not just fighting ability but fundamental character. The tournament medal felt solid and warm in Tommy's palm as he and Richardson walked toward the parking lot of the Los Angeles Sports Arena. The bronze medal for third place in his division represented more than just a ranking among junior competitors. It symbolized months of disciplined training and the transformation from victim to victor. Miguel Martinez stood beside Richardson's Chevelle, his expression unreadable as he watched his son approach with visible confidence and pride. The same boy who had been humiliated 5 months earlier now carried himself with the quiet dignity that Robert Trias had written about in his martial arts philosophy. "Congratulations," Miguel said quietly, his voice lacking the harsh edge that had characterized their interactions since the October tournament disaster. The simple word carried the weight of grudging respect and perhaps the beginning of understanding about what his son had accomplished. Richardson observed the interaction between father and son with the careful attention of someone who understood family dynamics and the complex emotions that competition could reveal. The United States Karate Association had always emphasized that martial arts training should strengthen family relationships rather than divide them. Tommy's performance in the tournament had demonstrated the effectiveness of proper karate instruction according to the standards that Trias had established when he founded the USKA in 1948. His controlled techniques, respectful conduct, and mental composure under pressure reflected the values that had made the organization the largest martial arts association in the nation. "The boy fought well," Miguel continued, addressing Richardson directly. "I can see that your training has made him stronger, not just physically, but in other ways." The admission came grudgingly, but it represented a significant shift from the hostility he had shown toward Tommy's martial arts involvement. Richardson nodded acknowledgement of the compliment while maintaining the diplomatic approach that had served him well in dealing with difficult parents throughout his teaching career. The USKA's success had always depended on instructors who could work effectively with entire families, not just individual students. The drive back to Phoenix gave Tommy time to reflect on how dramatically his life had changed since that humiliating October evening when Richardson had first intervened. The tournament medal was tangible proof of progress, but the real transformation had occurred in his confidence and self-respect. Richardson used the journey to discuss the historical significance of what they had just experienced, explaining how Robert Trias's vision of organized martial arts competition had created opportunities for young people to test themselves in controlled, respectful environments. Master Trias believed that tournaments should build character, rather than simply determine winners and losers. Richardson explained as they crossed the California-Arizona border. "Today you proved that proper training can overcome any obstacle, including your own fear and self-doubt." The United States Karate Association had grown to over 500,000 members worldwide by implementing this philosophy, creating a network of schools and instructors who shared common values and training standards. Back at the Richardson Academy that evening, Tommy carefully placed his tournament medal in the trophy case beside photographs of Robert Trias and other USKA legends. The placement felt symbolic, connecting his personal achievement to the larger legacy of American martial arts development. Richardson pulled out the guest register that every visitor to the dojo was required to sign, turning to a page from 1968 that bore the signature of Robert Trias himself during one of his rare visits to affiliated schools. The legendary founder's handwriting was precise and confident, reflecting the same attention to detail that had characterized his approach to martial arts instruction. Master Trias visited this dojo during his nationwide tour to standardize Shuri-ryu techniques, Richardson explained, pointing to the date beside the signature. He spent 3 hours working with our advanced students, demonstrating the kata forms that he and Master Konishi had refined just the year before. The connection to martial arts history gave Tommy a sense of participating in something much larger than personal achievement. The USKA had been founded to preserve and promote legitimate martial arts knowledge while preventing the commercialization that threatened to corrupt traditional values. As they finished cleaning the dojo and preparing for the next day's classes, Richardson made an announcement that would mark another milestone in Tommy's development. Starting next week, you'll begin assisting with the children's classes. Teaching others is the best way to deepen your own understanding of karate principles. The opportunity to share his knowledge with younger students represented the kind of responsibility that Robert Trias had believed should accompany martial arts advancement. The USKA's ranking system emphasized moral character and teaching ability alongside technical skill. Tommy accepted the responsibility with the seriousness that his training had taught him to bring to every aspect of martial arts practice. The bronze medal from Los Angeles was just the beginning of a journey that would require years of continued growth and service to others. The evening ended with meditation and breathing exercises, the same rituals that concluded every training session at Richardson's Academy. The consistency of practice reflected the disciplined approach that had made the USKA the most respected martial arts organization in America. Spring arrived in Phoenix with its characteristic warmth and clear skies as Tommy Martinez began his second year of training under Richardson's guidance. The bronze medal from Los Angeles had been joined by 2 more tournament placements, evidence of steady progress that reflected the systematic approach Robert Trias had built into the USKA curriculum. Tommy's role as assistant instructor with the children's classes had evolved beyond simple demonstration of techniques to include teaching the philosophical principles that Trias had considered essential to proper martial arts development. The responsibility had deepened his own understanding while connecting him to the educational mission that had driven the USKA's growth to over 500,000 members worldwide. The academy had grown as well, with Richardson adding evening classes for working adults and weekend seminars that attracted practitioners from across the Southwest. The expansion reflected the increasing acceptance of martial arts in American society, a transformation that Trias had predicted when he opened his first school in Phoenix 27 years earlier. Richardson frequently reminded his students that they were participating in living history, carrying forward traditions that Trias had brought back from his wartime service in the Pacific Theater. The connection to World War II veterans and their sacrifice gave weight to every training session and tournament competition. As Tommy worked with a class of 8-year-olds, teaching them the basic stances and blocks that form the foundation of Shuri-ryu karate, he reflected on how much his own life had changed since that humiliating October evening 18 months earlier. The confidence and discipline that Richardson had helped him develop now influenced every aspect of his daily existence. His relationship with his father had stabilized into cautious respect, with Miguel attending occasional tournaments and even expressing pride in Tommy's achievements. The transformation wasn't complete, but the violent confrontations that had once characterized their interactions had been replaced by grudging acknowledgement of Tommy's commitment to excellence. Richardson announced during a Wednesday evening class that the United States Karate Alliance would be hosting its annual Grand National Championships in Chicago during the summer, continuing the tradition that Robert Trias had established with the first World Karate Tournament at the University of Chicago Fieldhouse in 1963. The opportunity to compete in Chicago, the birthplace of organized American karate competition, represented a milestone that few young practitioners ever achieved. The tournament attracted competitors from around the world and maintained the high standards that had made the USKA's events the most respected martial arts competitions in the nation. Tommy's preparation for the Chicago tournament would require intensive training over the next 4 months, focusing on the advanced kata forms and sparring techniques that distinguished championship-level competition from local tournaments. Richardson emphasized that representing the academy at Grand Nationals carried responsibilities beyond personal achievement. Master Trias used to say that every student who competed at Grand Nationals was an ambassador for the entire martial arts community. Richardson explained as they worked through complex kata sequences. Your conduct and performance reflect not just on yourself or this school, but on the legacy that thousands of practitioners have built over the past 25 years. The weight of that responsibility motivated Tommy to push his training to new levels of intensity and focus. The techniques that had seemed impossibly complex when he first began studying under Richardson now flowed naturally as his body and mind integrated years of disciplined practice. The Academy's trophy case had grown to include awards from regional and state championships, evidence of Richardson's success in developing competitive martial artists according to the standards that Trias had established. Each trophy represented not just individual achievement, but contribution to the larger mission of promoting legitimate martial arts knowledge. As the training sessions intensified in preparation for Chicago, Tommy found himself drawing inspiration from the photographs of Robert Trias that lined Richardson's office walls. The legendary founder's expression of quiet determination seemed to embody the spirit that had built the USKA into the most influential martial arts organization in American history. Richardson shared stories about his own journey to Grand Nationals as a young competitor in the 1960s, when Trias himself had presided over the tournaments and personally evaluated the performance of every black belt division participant. The FY's connection to that golden age of American karate gave Tommy's training a sense of historical significance. The spring evenings at the Academy took on special meaning as instructor and student worked together toward the goal of representing their school with honor at the most prestigious tournament in American martial arts. The fluorescent lights and scarred wooden floors bore witness to preparation that honored the traditions Robert Trias had brought back from the Pacific Theater 30 years earlier. The train pulled into Chicago's Union Station on a humid July morning in 1974, carrying Tommy Martinez and Richardson toward the most significant tournament in American karate history. The USKA Grand National Championships represented the pinnacle of competitive martial arts, tracing its lineage directly back to the first World Karate Tournament that Robert Trias had organized at the University of Chicago Fieldhouse 11 years earlier. Chicago's skyline rose before them as they made their way from the station to the tournament venue, a downtown hotel that had been transformed into the epicenter of American martial arts competition. Over 800 competitors from across the nation and several foreign countries had gathered to test their skills according to the rules and standards that Trias had established during his decades of leadership. The tournament's atmosphere was electric with anticipation and reverence for the traditions being honored. Unlike regional competitions, Grand Nationals carried the weight of history and the presence of legendary figures who had shaped American karate since its earliest days. Richardson registered Tommy for the junior black belt division, a significant step up from the colored belt competitions where he had built his tournament record over the past 2 years. The black belt divisions at Grand Nationals attracted the most talented young practitioners from USKA schools nationwide, creating a level of competition that would test everything Tommy had learned under Richardson's guidance. As they walked through the hotel corridors, lined with photographs from previous Grand Nationals tournaments, Tommy studied the faces of champions who had competed during the golden age of American karate. The connection to Robert Trias and his vision of organized martial arts competition gave weight to every aspect of the tournament experience. The competition area had been arranged according to specifications that Trias himself had developed during the 1960s, with multiple rings allowing simultaneous matches while maintaining the dignity and respect that distinguished USKA events from commercial tournaments. Richardson pointed out several legendary figures in the crowd of spectators and officials, men who had trained directly under Trias and carried forward his teachings through their own schools and students. The presence of these martial arts pioneers reminded everyone present that they were participating in living history. Tommy's preparation for Grand Nationals had included months of intensive training in the advanced kata forms that would be evaluated by panels of high-ranking black belts, many of whom had learned these same techniques from Trias himself. The standards for technique and presentation at this level far exceeded anything Tommy had previously experienced. The opening ceremony included a moment of silence honoring Robert Trias, who at 62 was beginning to show signs of the health problems that would eventually claim his life. His presence at the tournament felt like a blessing from the founding father of American karate, lending gravitas to the competition that was about to unfold. As Tommy prepared for his first match, Richardson reminded him that representing their academy at Grand Nationals was an honor that carried responsibilities beyond personal achievement. Every technique demonstrated and every display of sportsmanship reflected not only on the individual competitor, but on the entire lineage of instruction that connected back to Trias's original vision. The competition rings buzzed with activity as hundreds of matches progressed simultaneously, each judged according to the standardized criteria that had made USKA tournaments the most respected martial arts competitions in the nation. The level of skill on display represented decades of development in American karate instruction. Tommy's division included young men who had been training since childhood in some of the most prestigious USKA schools in the country. The competition would test not only technical skill, but the mental discipline and character development that Trias had always emphasized as the true goals of martial arts training. The hotel's ballroom had been converted into a shrine to American karate history, with displays showcasing the evolution of the art from Trias's first school in Phoenix to the international organization that now included over 500,000 members worldwide. As the tournament progressed through its preliminary rounds, Tommy found himself drawing strength from the knowledge that he was competing on the same sacred ground where champions had been crowned for over a decade, continuing a tradition that connected him to the very foundations of American martial arts. The morning of Tommy's final match at the 1974 USKA Grand National Championships dawned grey and humid in Chicago, with the weight of accumulated pressure settling over the hotel like a heavy blanket. After 4 days of competition, Tommy had advanced through the preliminary rounds of the junior black belt division, displaying techniques and mental discipline that reflected 22 months of intensive training under Richardson's guidance. The championship match would determine not only the tournament winner, but Tommy's readiness to advance to senior black belt status within the USKA hierarchy that Robert Trias had established. The stakes extended far beyond personal achievement, to include honor for Richardson's academy and recognition within the broader martial arts community. Tommy's opponent was David Chen from San Francisco, a 17-year-old whose technical precision and competitive experience had made him the favorite to win the division. Chen represented one of the most prestigious USKA schools on the West Coast and carried the confidence of someone who had never lost a major tournament match. Richardson spent the morning reviewing strategy and mental preparation techniques that drew from his own competitive experience during the golden age of American karate in the 1960s. The approach emphasized the philosophical foundations that distinguished USKA competition from mere physical contests, focusing on character demonstration through martial arts performance. The championship ring was surrounded by tournament officials and spectators who included some of the most respected figures in American martial arts, lending gravitas to what would unfold over the next few minutes. The atmosphere reflected the reverence that the martial arts community held for Grand Nationals as the ultimate test of skill and character. As Tommy prepared for the match, he reflected on the journey that had brought him from humiliating defeat 18 months earlier to the championship round of the most prestigious tournament in American karate. The transformation represented more than improved fighting ability, encompassing the complete personality development that Trias had always emphasized as the true goal of martial arts training. The formal opening ceremony included the traditional bow that honored both opponents and the martial arts traditions they represented, a gesture that connected the immediate competition to centuries of warrior culture and the specific legacy that Robert Trias had brought to American shores. Chen opened with a series of lightning-fast hand techniques that demonstrated why he was considered the division's most dangerous competitor. But Tommy's defensive training under Richardson allowed him to weather the initial assault while positioning himself for effective counterattacks. The match developed into a showcase of contrasting styles, with Chen's explosive power and speed matched against Tommy's patience and tactical awareness. The technical exchange impressed the panel of judges, who recognized they were witnessing the culmination of years of dedicated training by both competitors. Tommy's first scoring technique came midway through the match, when he perfectly timed a reverse punch counterattack that caught Chen moving forward into the technique. The execution demonstrated the advanced timing and distance judgment that Richardson had emphasized throughout their training relationship. The crowd's reaction reflected appreciation for the high level of skill being displayed, But Tommy maintained the mental focus that Richardson had taught him to cultivate during competition. The ability to perform under pressure while maintaining awareness of the broader tactical situation represented one of the most valuable lessons from his martial arts education. As the match entered its final phase, both competitors showed signs of the physical and mental fatigue that came from 4 days of tournament competition. However, Tommy's conditioning and mental discipline allowed him to maintain technical precision, while his opponent began to show slight lapses in form and judgment. The decisive moment came when Chen attempted a high-risk jumping kick that left him vulnerable to the sweeping technique that Tommy had practiced thousands of times in Richardson's dojo. The execution was flawless, bringing Chen to the mat and earning the final point needed for tournament victory. The judges' flags confirmed what the crowd had witnessed, awarding the match and the championship to Tommy Martinez of Richardson's American Karate Academy. The victory represented not only personal achievement but validation of the training methods and philosophical approach that connected back to Robert Trias's original vision for American martial arts. Richardson's expression of quiet pride reflected the satisfaction of a teacher who had successfully guided a student from defeat to triumph through patient instruction and unwavering commitment to the principles that had built the USKA into the most respected martial arts organization in the nation. The autumn wind carried the scent of desert sage as Tommy Martinez, now 21 and a second-degree black belt, stood in the parking lot of the Community Recreation Center where his martial arts journey had begun 5 years earlier. He was no longer the frightened teenager who had been beaten and humiliated while his father watched in angry disappointment, but a confident young man whose tournament victories had brought recognition to Richardson's American Karate Academy throughout the Southwest. Richardson had asked Tommy to accompany him to this regional tournament not as a competitor, but as an assistant instructor, helping to prepare younger students for their first tournament experiences. The role reversal felt symbolic, connecting Tommy's personal transformation to the broader mission of the United States Karate Association to develop character through martial arts training. The familiar gymnasium buzzed with the same nervous energy that Tommy remembered from his own early competitions, but now he viewed the scene through the eyes of an instructor rather than a frightened novice. The young competitors warming up near the registration tables reminded him of his own journey from devastating defeat to national championship success. Among the competitors was a 13-year-old boy whose obvious fear and tension caught Tommy's attention immediately. The boy's father stood nearby, displaying the same aggressive posture and harsh criticism that Tommy remembered so vividly from Miguel's behavior during those difficult early years. Richardson nodded toward the family situation developing near the entrance doors, silently indicating that Tommy should handle the intervention that might be needed. The trust implicit in the gesture reflected the confidence that 5 years of training had built between instructor and student. Tommy approached the family as the father's voice began to rise in anger at his son's nervousness, recognizing the pattern that had once defined his own relationship with martial arts competition. The boy's expression of fear and shame mirrored exactly what Tommy had felt during his own humiliating debut at this same tournament 5 years earlier. "Excuse me," Tommy said quietly, his voice carrying the authority that came from years of tournament success and teaching experience. "I'm Tommy Martinez from Richardson's American Karate Academy. I noticed your son seems a little nervous about his first tournament." The father's initial hostility softened slightly when he recognized Tommy's name from tournament results, published in martial arts magazines throughout the region. The 1974 USKA Grand National Championship victory had made Tommy something of a celebrity within the local martial arts community. Tommy knelt to the boy's eye level, remembering how Richardson's intervention had changed the entire trajectory of his life during a moment of crisis. "What's your name and how long have you been training?" he asked gently, ignoring the father's continued grumbling about weakness and embarrassment. The boy's whispered response revealed that he had been studying karate for only 6 months, making his first tournament appearance a significant milestone in his martial arts development. Tommy recognized the mixture of excitement and terror that characterized every beginner's introduction to competitive martial arts. "I lost my first tournament match badly," Tommy shared, his voice carrying the wisdom that came from having survived and learned from failure. "My father was so angry that a stranger had to step in and help me. That stranger became my instructor and changed my entire life." The story resonated with both the boy and his father, who seemed to recognize the parallel to their own situation. Tommy's calm confidence and obvious success provided a living example of what proper martial arts training could accomplish when supported rather than sabotaged by family pressure. Richardson appeared beside them with the timing that came from years of working together, carrying the same quiet authority that had first impressed Tommy during their initial encounter. The presence of two accomplished black belts created a buffer zone that allowed the family situation to defuse naturally. Win or lose today, Tommy continued, addressing both the boy and his father. What matters is that you show respect for your opponent, your instructor, and the martial arts traditions we're all here to honor. Everything else is just details that will work themselves out over time. The tournament proceeded with the same organized efficiency that characterized all USKA-sanctioned events, but Tommy found himself watching the young boys' matches with special interest. The kid lost his first bout decisively, but handled the defeat with dignity and immediately sought out his opponent to offer congratulations. More importantly, the boy's father had remained silent throughout the competition, allowing his son to experience both defeat and recovery without the added burden of parental disappointment. The small victory represented the kind of character development that Robert Trias had always emphasized as the true purpose of martial arts training. As the tournament concluded and families began packing their equipment, Tommy reflected on the circular nature of his martial arts journey. From victim to victor to teacher, each phase had built upon the foundations that Richardson had established during those crucial early months of training. The Community Recreation Center's parking lot was nearly empty as Tommy and Richardson loaded their equipment into the familiar Chevelle, the same car that had carried them to countless tournaments over the past 5 years. The continuity felt comforting, connecting Tommy's transformation to the larger legacy of American martial arts development. Richardson's quiet satisfaction was evident as they drove through the Phoenix suburbs toward the academy that had become Tommy's second home. The successful intervention with the young family represented the kind of community service that distinguished legitimate martial arts schools from commercial operations. Focused only on profit, the story had come full circle. From Tommy's humiliating defeat and rescue to his ability to provide the same guidance for another young martial artist facing similar challenges, the cycle reflected the self-perpetuating nature of proper karate instruction, as envisioned by Robert Trias when he founded the USKA nearly 3 decades earlier.